Welcome back to Binging with Babish. Today we're going to be looking at my espresso workflow. And off the top of my head, I've lost a bit of hair. Okay, so I've split this video up into three parts. Part one is the kind of coffee that I like to pull shots with. Part two is every single piece of gear that I use pretty much every day. And part three, how I use it, the workflow. We're going to be pulling three different kinds of shots, two of which are more modern style espresso, the turbo and soup. So sit back and get comfortable. This is going to be a fun one. While this is pretty gear specific, these are just concepts and I'm fairly certain they'll translate well to other setups. And I've also thrown in a bunch of nifty tips and tricks. For example, the blind shaker became very popular a few months ago. And when I first got it, I absolutely hated it. But today I use it in a very specific way. It's a key part of my espresso workflow and I'm much quicker using that than when I used to just do WDT. So let's get into it. Also, if you're wondering why I look different every few minutes, it's because this video was shot like a feature film over several weeks with absolutely no regard for continuity. So enjoy the different avatars of yours truly, and hopefully the content will make up for the jarring cuts. Okay, let's start with the coffee. My wife Namisha, who also runs the business with me, likes to start her day with a flat white or a cortado, so that's the shot that I'm absolutely pulling every single day. This is typically a medium light or a medium roast and is usually a washed coffee in terms of processing method, but we'll also do a very clean, natural or honey. For example, this Blue Tokai coffee from Kalyadevrapura Estate is a pulp sun-dried coffee and it has been our go-to for the last 6 to 8 months. It's an excellent coffee if you want to try it. This video is not sponsored. So yeah, that's generally the category of coffees that I'm pulling for milk-based drinks. Slightly more developed, but still clean, classic notes of chocolate, nuts, and works really well, cuts through dairy. Now, I'm more of a filter coffee drinker. 80-90% of the time I'm drinking a V60, but 3 or 4 times a week I will crave a straight espresso, and for that I'm brewing something quite a bit lighter. Again, I like to keep this clean. I'm fine with a little bit of funk for pour over, but my palate just can't seem to handle it if it's dialed up with an espresso. So when it comes to these very light roasts, I'm either pulling soup or a regular 3:1 ratio. We'll talk about that a little more in the workflow section. So yeah, that's typically the two categories of coffees that I'm pulling shots with on any given day. But there is a ton of information on a bag of coffee that can be very useful to dial in. And we've spoken about this in depth in our Espresso Masterclass, which I've linked up here. So check that out if you haven't already. But now, on to the fun stuff, the gear. So I'll kick things off with the hero of the setup, the central element, if you will, and that is the Flair 58. This here happens to be the latest model, which is the Flair 58 Plus 2. Shitty name, they should have just called it the Pro or something. It's basically the original 58 with a few quality of life upgrades. I'll speak about those in a second. But I've had a lot of great espresso machines come through the coffee bar and always gravitated back to the Flair 58, and there's a very specific reason for that. In fact, the question we get asked most often when we post POV style videos of my workflow and when I'm pulling shots is why I'm using the Flair when I have a Meraki on the bar. Now, anyone who's been brewing espresso for a while now will know that that's a very easy question to answer. But basically, there is no comparison between those two machines. Now, don't get me wrong, the Meraki is a great machine. It's got a lot going for it. We even did a full review on it, which you can check, linked up here. But at the end of the day, it is just a flat 9-bar machine with some basic pre-infusion capabilities. The Flair, on the other hand, is a freaking Swiss Army knife. You can do the most complex pressure profiling and pull pretty much any style of shot with that machine. In fact, and I've said this before, if you know what you're doing, it is impossible to pull a bad shot of espresso with the Flair, unless you're doing it intentionally. So it isn't going anywhere, at least until my meticulous shows up, which I'm waiting for patiently. Now, before we move on, let me just talk a little bit about the Flair 58 Plus 2 for a minute. It's essentially the original, but with a bunch of quality of life upgrades. It has slightly better cable management. It's still not perfect, but definitely a welcome addition. The power brick looks nicer. It's got a nice little shot mirror, and the controls for the heat settings are integrated into the base, which is very welcome, but it does have a small UX flaw. Because of where it's positioned, if you're in front of the machine, which is going to be the case for most users, this large handle covers the light. So I regularly forget to turn this off, which is super annoying because it doesn't have a cutoff. It'll just stay on indefinitely. I really wish they had changed this from the original. So overall, a little more polished. I really like the darker wood accents, and like I said, a bunch of quality of life upgrades. So if you're in the market looking for a really powerful machine that also has a heating element, then I couldn't recommend this enough. But on the other hand, if you're someone who already owns the Flair 58, I don't think that this is worth the additional expense. Anyway, there's your mini review of the Flair 58 Plus 2. Let's move on. Since I mentioned the Meraki, let's just talk about that. I use that solely to steam milk. I know, overkill. It's like buying a nice car and using it just to listen to music. But hey, I have one and the steam pressure is phenomenal. So I've gotten a bit too used to it to go back to anything else. So that's what I use. But if you do own a machine like the Flair or even a semi-automatic that has shitty steam power, there are a lot of brands like Subminimal and Dreo that make excellent tools to texture milk. And so that's definitely something that you can consider if you're into milk-based drinks. Okay, next up, let's talk grinders. Super important. Now, obviously we have a ton of grinders here in the studio, but some get used more than others. For filter, I find myself experimenting a lot more with burr sets and RPM and different grinders. But for espresso, it's usually one of two grinders. When I'm brewing the medium light or medium roast for milk-based drinks, or even occasionally drinking straight, it's been the Akaya Orbit with the SSP Lab Suite V3 burrs in there. I've really grown to love these. It's a perfect balance of clarity and sweetness and complexity, and it's also way more forgiving than the version 2s because they're designed to produce a little more fines to make it easier to pull shots. So that's been my go-to. And for more modern style shots where I'm pulling longer ratios with lighter roasts, I've really been digging the DF83Vs with the SSP multipurpose. These are 83mm burrs, and provided they're aligned well, they have excellent clarity and mouthfeel, contrary to popular belief. So that's it for grinders. Okay, onto some accessories. The basket that I'm using here is the Weber Unifilter. It's one of the newer fancy baskets, and the 20% or whatever increase in holes is life-changing. No, it's not. So here's the deal. Going from a shitty stock basket to a precision one like the VST or IMS is much more of a noticeable improvement than going from a VST to a Unifilter. Hopefully that makes sense, and that's been my experience. You get slightly more clarity, a better built product that looks better in my opinion, and the shots pull quite a bit faster. So if you run a cafe and you need to bust out shot after shot, what typically takes around 25 to 30 seconds on a VST basket takes around 16 to 18 seconds on this basket. So if you look at it over the course of a day or a week or a year, then your time savings are pretty staggering. So if you really want one of these fancy new baskets just to try them out, then go ahead and get it. But if you already own a precision basket, I would say you don't really need it. Okay, next let's look at puck screens. I've tested a bunch of these. I used to use the thicker mesh ones for the longest time, and they do a really good job, but they're absolutely disgusting. They're a nightmare to clean. There's just so much surface area in there for like coffee oils and gunk to build up that you start to taste this in your espresso just 5 to 6 shots in if they aren't cleaned properly. And I've tried a lot of different ways to clean them, and the only proper way to get these at least 90% clean is with an ultrasonic bath. Having to buy a dedicated gadget to clean just one small part of your entire espresso workflow just seems a bit ridiculous to me. So I ditched that, tested a bunch of other screens, and settled on the Weber Puck Saver. Now this has two things going for it. One is it's so thin it barely has any thermal mass, so you don't have to worry about it taking any heat out of the brew water. The other thing I really like is that the holes are so small that water barely soaks into the puck until you've applied pressure. The screen that ships with the Flair 58 Plus 2 is actually really well built and looks super cool, but I think the holes are a tad too large. Basically, when you fill up the tank and you pull the lever up to open the valve and fill up the headspace, at that moment, I think these holes are too big because you can see at the end of the shot that it's dug a small hole in the puck. Moving on, we have the dosing ring. Here, the most important thing to pay attention to is the fit. You want to make sure that the inner walls line up properly with the basket and no part of this dosing ring inserts into the basket, because that will leave a trench and lead to severe channeling. I'm using this magnetic one from Buku, which is very convenient, but like I said, as long as it fits properly, it'll do the job. Now, speaking of Buku, I've also been testing their tamper, which works very similar to the Force tamper and has that inbuilt mechanism which makes a loud click when you reach a certain calibrated pressure. It also has a WDT tool built in. So yeah, it works reasonably well. I really like that I can tamp with the dosing ring on. It just streamlines the process a little bit, but it's not perfect because you have grounds that build up above the plate that need regular cleaning. The plate can unscrew and become a bit loose, that needs tightening every once in a while. And the last one, which is the most annoying, is sometimes even when you've reached the right pressure, you don't hear the click. Okay, now as if we haven't coddled this freaking pile of coffee powder enough, we gotta shake it. Because why should bartenders have all the fun, right? When I got the Weber shaker, I absolutely hated it. I almost gave up on it. Let me show you why. As instructed, I ground coffee straight into it, shut the lid, gave it a few shakes, and open it up to see this disaster. And I can guarantee you that I'm not the only one, because I've seen tons of images that look very, very similar on Reddit and other forums. Honestly, at this point, I was ready to give up and just stick to WDT, but then I had a thought. The grounds only stick to the lid and not to the side walls or even this bell that opens the bottom. So why not shake more aggressively sideways and do more gentle shakes up and down? And that worked. And I'm going to show you exactly how I use it when we look at the workflow. But now that the grounds are all shaken up, they need a little bit of grooming. I promise, this is the last tool. You can do this with any decent WDT tool. I prefer ones that have 0.3 to 0.35 mm needles, but I have been absolutely obsessed with this particular one, and it's called the Flick by Subminimal. Let me show you why. Okay, do I need to say anything else? It is so much fun to open and close this thing. It does a really good job, and it's great for travel too because the needles are always protected. So there you have it. That is all of the tools that I use almost every day to brew mediocre espresso. Now, if you enjoy milk-based drinks and you're into latte art, then I absolutely love the large WPM pitcher from Slow Pour Supply. It was recommended by Emily Bryant. As for drinkware, if it's regular espresso, I like this Cruve shot glass or the Icosa one. If I'm pulling soup, then I like the Oria Sense cups or even the Icosa ones. And lastly, if it's milk-based like a flat white or a cappuccino, then of course the handmade ARAMSE cups. But now, let's pull some shots and look at all of this gear in action. Okay, workflow. Now I'll start with puck prep because it remains largely unchanged irrespective of the coffee I'm using or the kind of shot that I'm pulling. So we'll cover that first and then we'll pull some shots. So first up, I'm gonna weigh some coffee using this fancy subminimal scales. They call the sub scales. So around 18.2, 18.3 grams of coffee to compensate for retention. We have this really nice medium roast from Blue Tokai here. I'm going to be grinding with the Akaya Orbit. This has the LSV3s inside. And I'm grinding straight into the Weber blind shaker. So let's get the lid off. Grinder on. I'm at 600 RPM. And I dump this straight in. I'm at around 10 ticks away from the touch point. So, all right. Okay, so we're done grinding. Lid on. Now let me show you how I like to use this. So basically, pretty aggressive shakes left and right, and then tumbles up and down. Now you can turn it around, but I haven't found that to be necessary. You can do it if you want, but just a few times like this, up and down, give it a couple of shakes. Gentle knocks on the counter. And if you look here, super clean, unlike how it looked previously. And then I like to just make sure you hold the center bell in place. A couple of gentle shakes so that I have all the grounds nice and flat. And then I get this dosing funnel. I like to place this directly on top. Now when I open this up, I get a perfect mount right in the middle of the portafilter. Lift, ring the bell, get that back here. And now, as you can see, we have a nice mound right in the middle of the portafilter. And then out comes this cool ass thing. Get the needles out, and I'm just barely inserting the needles into the bed here. I just want to rake the absolute top of this bed of coffee just to get that part nice and flat. Give it a quick tap. Then I get my tamper straight on top of the dosing funnel. Super convenient. Tamp until you hear the click, and then be gentle when you release it. Don't just let go. This tamper fits pretty snug, so it can create a vacuum and suck the puck up. that would be a disaster. Dosing ring off, and then we get this flimsy thing on top. Now, like I said, I really love this, but it is super thin and it's very easy to damage, which is kind of annoying. So get it on straight on top, and there we have our perfect puck ready to go on the Flair 58. So that's about it. No matter what shot I'm pulling, what kind of coffee, whether it's a longer ratio or a turbo shot or soup or just a regular traditional espresso, my puck prep just largely remains the same. I will definitely change the grind size, but that's about it. Everything else remains the same. I don't really ever change my dose. So yeah, let's pull some shots. Okay, so here's a quick Flair 58 hack if you do use this machine. I like to move the lever all the way to the top and set it to 2 on the heat settings because I am brewing a medium roast now, and then have the portafilter locked in. What this does is it allows preheating to be the most efficient, because with the Flair, you have the heating element which is largely concentrated on the top of this brew chamber. So having the plunger above doesn't let the heat dissipate out. And for me, I like to let it sit like this for about 10 minutes before I brew. You can brew the moment you hear the beep on the machine, but I found the temperatures to largely be a lot more stable if you give it another 5 or 10 minutes. The other reason is that the plunger is actually a pretty big mass of metal, and having it in contact with the coils on top gets it nice and hot. And then once you're ready to pull your shot, you can get your portafilter out, push the lever all the way down now while you're doing your puck prep, because that big mass, which is the plunger, is now heating the bottom part of the brew chamber also, so you have less of a temperature gradient from top to bottom. I usually use the Akayas, but I've been playing around with these Buku scales, which are actually quite interesting. Okay, lock the portafilter in. Okay, another nifty hack for all you Flair users: fill a little bit of water in, and then just give it a couple of wiggles, and that gets rid of any air pockets inside. And this is critical because you don't want any air in the system when you're pulling shots with a manual machine, or any machine for that matter. There you go. Little bit of pre-infusion, then up to 8 bars. We're around 20 grams now. Slowly start ramping down. And 36, we're done. So yeah, 36 grams, it's reading slightly higher, but yeah, the flow rate we hit around 1.82, which is great for a more traditional shot like this, which is 1:2. So yeah, there you have it. Now to get some milk in here. Going to attempt to pour some latte art in this weird position. We just pulled a regular shot of espresso, 1:2, 18 in, 36 out. Now I'm going to skip the lungo, which is just a slightly longer shot where you grind a little finer and bump the temperature up a little bit, because it's very similar. And I'm going to pull 2 more modern styles of espresso. You may have heard of these. One's called the turbo shot and the other one is called soup. Now, starting with the turbo, as the name suggests, it's a slightly faster shot of espresso where you grind a little coarser. I know, it sounds counterintuitive, but there's an entire scientific paper on it by Christopher Hendon. You can check it out if you're interested. I've linked to it below. Basically, they found that if you grind a little coarser, it's much easier for the water to go through the puck more evenly. There's less chances of finding parts of least resistance, there's less clumping. So overall, shot to shot, your consistency dramatically improves. And secondly, in spite of being a quicker shot, like we saw here with the traditional espresso was around 18 to 20 seconds on these modern baskets, this is going to be around 12 to 15 seconds. So yeah, quite a bit quicker, but somehow the increase in flow rate and the fact that we're pulling a little longer, in this case it's going to be a 1:3, allows us to get to those extraction levels of 18-19% and get a balanced cup of coffee. It's super interesting. But the way that we're extracting this coffee is a little different, so the flavor profile is a little different in the cup. If I had to describe it, you're getting more acidity and a more vibrant cup overall with higher clarity, but you compromise on texture. You're not getting as viscous or textural of a shot as you do with a regular 1:2 espresso. Now, if you take this and you push it even further, then you get soup. So basically you're grinding even coarser and you're brewing at pretty much no pressure. The needle may hit 1 bar or so, but that's about it. There's no meaningful pressure in the shot. And you're also going even longer with the ratios. You can go all the way up to 1:5, but again, it depends on the coffee. And we do what is called a pre-wet, which is basically just saturating the puck so that when you then push down at a fast flow rate, it gushes through, but it gushes through evenly. The funny thing is, historically, the soup shots are the ones that the baristas just looked at and would toss. But I guess somewhere along the way, somebody decided to taste it and realize it's f***ing amazing. So here, we're using the coarser grind to get very even flow through the puck. And we're pulling longer ratios and much faster. So we're using that higher flow rate and more water to extract the coffee properly. These cups are even more vibrant. If I had to describe them in one line, it would be a concentrated pour over. Much more acid forward, you're getting higher clarity and a lot more delineation in terms of flavors. So you get this super interesting shot that's somewhere between a pour over and a turbo shot, and it works phenomenally well for very light roasted coffee. So you should absolutely give it a try. But now, all of this talk has got me craving espresso, so let's pull these 2 shots. I'll talk about what I'm tasting, and then we can wrap this one up. Now let's pull a turbo shot. I'm gonna try and do 18 in and around 54 out in roughly 12 to 15 seconds. And this one, we'll be going to around, I think, 7 or 8 bars. I don't have this coffee fully dialed in, so let's see how it goes. Also, we're at the highest temperature setting on the Flair 58. It's generally what I prefer for turbo shots and light roasts. All right, hit all the numbers. Weirdly, the app didn't work properly, so I wasn't able to get the graph, but that's fine. We got 54 out in about 15 seconds. So spot on. We got up to a max of 7.5 bars, I think, and then slowly ramped down. Time to taste. Cheers. Really nice. A lot more clarity, a lot more open than a regular espresso. Oh wow, it's making my mouth water. So like I said, there's more separation of flavor notes because 1, you're pulling a longer ratio, and 2, the higher flow rate. It's also very balanced. You do lose a little bit in terms of texture, but for me, my preference with light roasts is definitely this versus trying something like a blooming shot where you grind very fine and you do a long pre-infusion or a bloom, if you will. This style of espresso is my preference, so give it a try, see how you like it. I'm going to take another sip, and then it's time for soup. Okay, let's make some soup. I think I should be able to sit down and do this because there's barely any pressure here. I'm also using the Buku scales and the pressure transducer here, and hopefully I'll have a graph to show you at the end of the shot. Okay, I haven't actually bothered preheating because I have found it to not be necessary when pulling this kind of shot. I'm doing 18 grams in, and once I'm done with the shot, we can talk a little bit more. I'm going to start with pre-wetting, basically letting the puck saturate, and then I'm going to gently pull down to get to my desired ratio. For this coffee, I found around 1:4 or 1:5 to work well. So let's do that. You already see the drops. And then I'm going to go down gently. Barely any pressure. Pull up on the lever, stop the shot. All right, we have soup. Let's taste this. Okay, let's ignore the mess over here and give this a taste. Oh, smells so good. Cheers. That's insane. It still blows my mind every time I pull a shot like this. It seems like it shouldn't be extracted properly, but it always is. The key with soup, I would say, is to get the flow rate right. Too fast and you pull out quite a bit of bitters and astringency. And if it's too slow, it kind of tastes overly sour and weird. So play around with the flow rate, and once you nail that, you'll get cups that are absolutely incredible. This is like This is like a pour over concentrate, and it's just absolute fruit bomb. You saw how that shot looked. I mean, this should not taste good, but it does. Tastes so damn good. Okay, let's quickly analyze the graph. I hit start at around 3 seconds and we finished the shot at 18 seconds, so that was a 15-second shot. As you can see, barely any pressure. It goes up to around half a bar of pressure. And then we see the flow rate, which is the most important one. We have the pre-wetting phase where the water was dripping out at around 3 to 4 mils per second. And then we ramp up and get to a maximum of around 9 mils per second. And then we start ramping down around 10 seconds all the way down to 0. So yeah, really terrible looking shot on a graph. It looks terrible too, but the taste is a whole other story. So if you haven't tried pulling soup, then I highly recommend it. Try pretty light roasts and start at around 1:3 and pull longer and see where you hit that sweet spot. Play around with different flow profiles, which can be adjusted both by how quickly you pull the lever down and the grind size. Damn, we've covered a lot of ground in this one. We started with all of the equipment that I used, and then we looked at puck prep in detail, super critical, irrespective of the kind of shot that you're pulling. And then we pulled 3 different styles of shots. One is a regular 1:2, and we even poured some latte art. The other 2 are more modern styles of espresso, the turbo shot and soup. Those of you who haven't tried that, hopefully this has piqued your curiosity. And those of you who have, I hope there's something in here that will help you improve your shots. But now, I think it's time we wrap this one up. Thank you so much for watching, and brew ARAMSE.